It starts with a heartbeat that skips, not out of excitement but out of a sudden cold dread. Perhaps it's a tiny correction from your boss, a simple, please double-check the formatting next time. Or maybe it's the way a friend's tone shifted just a fraction of a degree during dinner. To anyone else, it's a momentary blip in a busy day, but to you, it feels like a physical blow to the chest. Suddenly, the room feels smaller. Your throat tightens. A wave of shame so hot it feels like a fever washes over you. You aren't just upset, you are devastated. You feel the urge to retreat, to quit the job, to apologize 1,000 times, or to never speak to that friend again. You've likely been told you're too sensitive or taking things the wrong way. But what if I told you this isn't a character flaw? What if there's a real neurological story behind why your heart breaks so easily? Today, we are peeling back the curtain on Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD. We're exploring why your brain can treat a minor critique like a life-threatening social exile, and how you can finally stop the spiral before it pulls you under. To understand why a small correction feels like a catastrophe, we have to look at the machinery of the brain. RSD isn't a formal diagnosis in the DSM-5. It's a clinical pattern first described in depth by psychiatrist Dr. William Dodson, particularly in adults with ADHD. Think of it as an emotional allergy. Research on emotional dysregulation in ADHD, which a 2014 review in the American Journal of Psychiatry by Shaw and colleagues called a core feature of the disorder, shows that the dialogue between the prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, and the amygdala, the center of our primitive emotions, often runs differently. When a threat, like a perceived slight, enters the amygdala, the PFC is supposed to step in and say, "Wait, they probably just had a long day. It's not about you." But for many people with ADHD, that regulation arrives late, quietly, or not at all. The emotion hits the system at full volume, mostly unfiltered. There's also the dopamine story. The ADHD brain has well-documented differences in dopamine signaling, mapped in research led by scientists like Dr. Nora Volkow at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Dopamine is part of how we feel motivated, stable, and socially okay. So when a sharp social moment lands, it doesn't just sting, it can knock the bottom out of a system that was already running low on its own stabilizing chemistry. Let's review some scenarios that you may have experienced, beginning with self-image. Imagine you walk into a meeting and a colleague who usually greets you looks down at their phone and says nothing. For most, it's a forgettable second. For someone prone to RSD, the brain can process that moment using some of the same neural machinery as physical pain. In a landmark 2003 study published in Science, Dr. Naomi Eisenberger and her team at UCLA used fMRI to show that the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the region that registers the unpleasantness of a physical burn, lit up during social exclusion. When you say it hurts, you aren't being metaphorical. You are experiencing something your brain has translated into a real signal of pain. Because the pain of rejection is so agonizing, the brain develops a defense mechanism, hypervigilance. You become an expert at reading the room. You monitor the micro-expressions of your partner, the cadence of your boss's emails, and the vibe of the group chat. This leads to intense masking, the process of molding your personality to be as inoffensive and perfect as possible. But there is a high cost. By constantly trying to be what others want, you lose the map of who you actually are. You are living in a state of pre-emptive apology, trying to fix a rejection that hasn't even happened yet. Unlike standard depression or anxiety, which can be a low-grade simmer, RSD is a flash flood. It is triggered by a specific event and peaks almost instantly. This is the emotional dysregulation that researchers like Dr. Russell Barkley have argued belongs at the center of the ADHD picture, not on the side. You might be having a wonderful day, but one off comment from a coworker sends you into a 4-hour spiral of self-loathing. It's hard for loved ones to understand, because the reaction seems disproportionate to the trigger. But in the world of RSD, there is no such thing as a small trigger. There is only safe and unsafe. One of the most exhausting signs of RSD is what cognitive therapists call overgeneralization. If you make a mistake on a report, your brain doesn't say, "I messed up the report." It says, "I am a failure, I am incompetent, and everyone is finally realizing they shouldn't have hired me." A single moment gets rewritten as a verdict on your entire identity. In the heat of rejection, you forget that people have loved you for years. It can feel as though you have always been disliked and always will be. If you recognize yourself in these words, please hear this. Your brain is not broken. It is wired with the volume turned up. The goal isn't to stop being sensitive. Sensitivity is often the root of your empathy, your creativity, and your deep capacity for love. The goal is to build a buffer between the stimulus and the response. Shift 1. The pause rule. When the heartbreak hits, acknowledge it. Tell yourself, my amygdala is screaming, but my reality is likely fine. I'm not going to make any major decisions, send any heated texts, or quit any jobs while the wave is still cresting. Even a few hours of intentional delay, a principle drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy, gives the prefrontal cortex time to catch up to the emotional flood. Shift 2. Question the narrative. We often treat our feelings as facts. If we feel rejected, we assume we are rejected. Start asking, what else could this mean? Maybe the delayed text isn't a sign of a dying friendship. Maybe they just dropped their phone in the sink. Shift 3. Radical self-validation. Stop apologizing for your sensitivity. When you feel that wave of shame, speak to yourself like a protector would speak to a child. This hurts right now, and that's okay. We are safe, even if we are misunderstood. Self-awareness is not a label of brokenness. It is a map. Once you understand the terrain of your own mind, you can stop blaming yourself for the weather. You might still feel the rain, but you'll finally know how to carry an umbrella. And if the storms feel overwhelming, please remember that working with an ADHD, informed therapist or clinician can be one of the most powerful tools in your kit. You don't have to map this alone. If this felt like a mirror of your own experience, you aren't alone, but you are understood. I want to hear your story in the comments. What is a small moment that felt like a heartbreak to you, and how did you navigate your way back to the light? Your vulnerability might be the exact map someone else needs today. Don't forget to subscribe if you're ready to start working with your brain instead of against it.